Ever wonder what the CEO of a giant corporation, the headmaster of a magical school, and the king of some epic fantasy realm all have in common? Well, you might be surprised to learn they can probably all trace their storytelling DNA back to one single figure: Zeus, the ancient Greek king of the gods. In this explainer, we're going to break down how this one mythological deity became one of the most powerful and lasting blueprints in all of storytelling. So let's just start with a question. Why do so many of our favorite stories, from massive fantasies to superhero movies, seem to need a big boss? That one powerful, maybe kind of flawed authority figure who's sitting at the very top, calling the shots, and shaping the world of the story. It's a character type that just feels essential, right? Well, it turns out this super common character didn't just appear out of nowhere. You can trace its origins all the way back to one figure, a king who ruled over not just mortals, but the gods themselves. To really understand this blueprint, we've got to start at the source. We have to look at Zeus in his original role as the one and only king of the gods. So who exactly was Zeus in Greek mythology? Well, for starters, he was the ruler of Mount Olympus, the god of the sky, thunder, and lightning. And he didn't just, inherit the throne. No, he won it by defeating the monstrous titans, which basically established him as the top dog in the entire universe. And that lightning bolt he's always carrying around, that wasn't just some cool weapon. It was a symbol of his absolute final authority. But here's the thing. Zeus was never just some perfect, all-powerful king. He was incredibly complex. On the one hand, he was the divine judge, the guy who enforced cosmic justice and kept order. But on the other hand, the myths are filled with stories of him being deeply flawed. He was emotional, incredibly jealous, and just far from perfect. And it's that very complexity, that conflict inside him, that made him such a powerful symbol for all the stories that came later. And pretty quickly, this complex guy moved from just being a character in a myth to being a powerful idea, a symbol that meant something much bigger within literature itself. As Western literature really started to form, Zeus's role began to change. In Homer's epics like the Iliad, he's less of a character running around and more like a force of nature, the ultimate authority pulling the strings of fate for heroes like Achilles. In Hesiod's Theogony, his rise to power becomes this grand metaphor for order winning out over chaos. And by the time we get to the great Greek tragedies, he's something even bigger. He's the living embodiment of cosmic divine law that governs everything. And this idea is really the heart and soul of classical tragedy. You see, characters could make their own choices, sure, but their freedom was always kinda an illusion. It was limited by a higher power. They were like actors on a stage that the gods had already built. And Zeus, he represented the stage itself, the ultimate boundary for human ambition. And this is where Zeus makes the leap. He goes beyond mythology and becomes a powerful storytelling tool, the Zeus archetype. So what in the world is a literary archetype? It's actually pretty simple. It's just a recurring pattern, a type of character or symbol that keeps popping up in stories across different cultures and time periods. And why? Because it taps into something universal about being human. It's kind of like a storytelling shortcut or a blueprint. And the Zeus archetype is a perfect example of this. When a writer drops a Zeus-like figure into their story, they're using that established blueprint to explore some really big ideas. Supreme rulers who hold all the cards, the whole concept of cosmic justice, the uncontrollable power of fate, and, this is a big one, the fundamental limits of our own human freedom. Okay, so where does this ancient blueprint show up today? Well, let's take a look at the modern Mount Olympus, our pop culture. And trust me, he is everywhere. In the Percy Jackson books, Zeus is a powerful and honestly pretty volatile ruler. Then you have Disney's Hercules, where he's this much softer, kind, fatherly figure. And then you jump over to the God of War video games, and he's this terrifying, tyrannical force of immense power. See? The core blueprint is the same, but it gets twisted and adapted to fit the message of each story. So here's the real kicker. Whether it's that wise king, a distant and powerful CEO, or a headmaster at a magical school, you have seen this character 100 times before. And the DNA for that character? It can be traced right back to the myths of ancient Greece. It all started here. But why? Why does this one archetype have so much staying power? Well, the answer is all about the huge, fundamental human questions it forces us to think about. The Zeus archetype works so well because it perfectly captures a core conflict of being human, our own ambition versus some kind of higher power. It's that constant tension between our deep, burning desire to control our own destiny and that nagging, unsettling idea that maybe our fate is being guided by forces way, way beyond our control. And that's why his influence is still so huge. He's still our go-to archetype for authority. We even use phrases like the thunderbolt of Zeus as a kind of cultural shorthand for sudden, decisive power. But maybe most importantly, he gives us the blueprint for creating these powerful, morally complicated leaders, which constantly reminds us of that timeless struggle between having great power and having great responsibility. So, when you boil it all down, Zeus is so much more than just a character from an old myth. He is a timeless, powerful idea. He's a way for us to explore the very nature of power, of justice, and of our own little place in the grand cosmic order of things. And that brings us to one last thought for you. Now that you can see the pattern, take a look at the books you're reading, the movies you're watching. Who is the Zeus in the stories that you love?